Hello and welcome to another episode of New Frontier. And for this episode, we're extremely excited to be welcoming Megla from many places. So Megla has over 23 years of experience in the Asia sourcing industry. She is passionate about helping global importers source products from manufacturing hubs outside of China, such as India and Vietnam. She is the founder of the India Sourcing Group, I believe, and maybe some others. And yeah, Megla, welcome. And in this sourcing trip, sorry, my apologies, and others, and welcome. And did I anything to add on that? Because I know you've got a lot in your portfolio going on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Max, for having me over here, first of all. And yeah, so we focus on sourcing products from India, and we've also started sourcing in Vietnam now, and also Turkey. I was in Turkey last week attending a conference, speaking at a conference, and meeting with manufacturers. So lots of cool products being manufactured in Turkey. So yeah, we're basically trying to focus on China alternatives. And we do
Mhm.
source in China as well. We have partners there, but primarily focused on China alternatives.
That
And
makes
I mean, this is actually really interesting because obviously, for the last more than 10 years, China has been, or actually much more than 10 years, but China has been
Yeah.
kind of the place where Amazon sellers and e-commerce sellers go to source their products. A lot of the courses, focus exclusively on finding products through Alibaba. How do you reckon the sort of the sourcing landscape has changed in the last few years and sort of the mindset about sourcing from China?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that are happening over here. So, first of all, production costs in China have been increasing, and this is not something new. This has been happening for the last, 5, 10 years or so, and that's why a lot of the larger brands that have, more manual kind of processes or products that require more labor have been moving out of China because labor costs have been going up and overall production costs have been going up. So, for example, apparel production, a lot of the low end basic apparel production has moved to low cost countries such as Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, Vietnam, things like t shirts, socks, a lot of those kinds of things. Also, shoes, for example, Nike has set up huge factories in Vietnam around 10 years ago. That's when they started producing shoes over there. And a lot of those shoe production has also moved out because that's also, again, low value production in high volumes. China has been moving up the value chain. They have been producing and focusing on more high tech products, more technology, more R&D, and more sophisticated kind of products. So this is a trend that has been happening and will continue to happen over the next couple of years. And that's why production hubs such as India, Vietnam, Turkey are sort of coming up. The other thing that's happening is that until now, China has been the manufacturing capital of the world, and you can practically source anything and everything from China, right? So that is going to continue. But in the future, like 5 years down the line, there will be different production hubs for different types of products, and sourcing will be more fragmented. There'll be more production hubs, more options to choose from, and price, of course, is a concern. So a lot of the prices in China are going up, and so buyers are going to be looking for lower cost, production hubs. Secondly, what's also happening is the U.S. and China trade war, and the trade tension between the two countries has also encouraged and is sort of, forcing people to some extent to look for alternatives because they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket. So that's one of the reasons we are getting more, bigger buyers, not only Amazon e-commerce sellers, but traditional wholesalers, importers, retailers, traders, retailers. All of those types of companies are looking for, different products or different sourcing alternatives to China.
That
Very
makes sense.
interesting.
So you mentioned there's kind of like this category split that's kind of coming with different category, China moving up the chain and maybe different categories moving elsewhere, and also these kind of political headwinds, in the political environment we are today. Seems like there's at least a potential for more trade wars that we kind of saw historically between US and China and other places. Um, so how does this category split kind of work? What is there certain countries or places which are seeing uh, you know different categories specialization, or how are you seeing it kind of on the ground?
Yes, definitely. So we are seeing certain countries specializing in specific categories. First of all, China remains the main production hub for electronics. And
Hmm.
there's no other country currently that is really competing with China in terms of electronics. There is a lot of large scale OEM production happening both in India and Vietnam, but these are currently the larger companies like Samsung or Apple, those sort of companies setting up factories. In India, there's, iPhone is being produced over here now, and gradually the electronic supply chain is improving, is getting better. There are more, components being manufactured, but currently all of the components are being sourced from China, and then they are, sort of being assembled over here. Of course, there are some components that are being manufactured here as well, but currently for most electronics, not 100% of the full product is being manufactured in India, but that is changing gradually. As these big companies set up their factories over here, the supply chain will develop. There'll be more producers of components. And in fact, India, the government has invested in three production facilities for manufacturing chips. And so that's going to be a game changer once those sort of that production starts to happen. Then a lot of the electronic production will increase significantly. So that's one category. Vietnam is sort of the similar in a similar situation where the large brands are mostly producing items, electronics items over there. But in India, we're already seeing some local brands that are developing. So there are brands that make headsets, wireless headphones, power banks, those kind of small consumer items. But it's just sort of starting out. Um, then, in terms of other categories, so India, for example, specializes in a lot of natural materials. So anything that's made of, let's say metal, wood, ceramic, glass, leather, cotton, that's a huge category from India, specifically organic cotton. So anything organic, eco-friendly, natural material, India is doing really, really well with those kinds of things. And there are, of course, other types of items as well, like plastic injection items, home products that are made from plastic injection items, some appliances, some sort of hardware tools. Automotive parts is a big industry as well. Any kind of automotive part, also accessories for auto parts. So there are certain industries and production hubs within India that specialize in different product categories. Similarly, Vietnam has its own specialties. So a couple of products that Vietnam really specializes in are footwear, especially sports shoes. And it's mostly because of Nike. They have sort of set up their factories there, and that has encouraged other companies to set up facilities there as well. Then you've also got things like bags, backpacks. Those are items that a lot of e-commerce Amazon sellers are finding success with, because those are quite popular on Amazon and they're sort of easy to sell. A lot of buyers that we work with, they have designed their own backpacks, for example, baby bags or other types of functional backpacks, and we're helping them produce those in Vietnam. Other categories in Vietnam are leather items, leather shoes, some wooden items, really beautiful wooden toys coming out of Vietnam as well, lacquer, home decor items, and yeah, I mean those are some of the products that Vietnam does as well. And Turkey, in fact, interestingly, also has certain key items. In fact, it's very interesting. When I was talking to somebody at the trade show recently that I visited, they said that Turkey is the China of Europe. So if you are an Amazon seller or e-commerce seller in Europe, then definitely look at Turkey as a sourcing destination because of the proximity to Europe. I mean, Turkey is considered, half Asia, half Europe. And the prices are not as low as China, but then you save on transportation costs and, of course, the timely, faster deliveries. So there are pros and cons. But Turkish cotton, oh my God, there were like beautiful cotton towels and bed sheets and such high quality. Like I've not seen such beautiful towels and home furnishings, anywhere. So Turkish cotton is, of course, very well known. Also, a lot of cosmetic items. I was really surprised to see that there's so much R&D happening in terms of herbal and organic and vegan cosmetics, like really huge variety. Some toys, some wooden items, apparel, very high quality apparel, coats, kids wear, women's wear. So those are some of the categories from Turkey as well.
This is really interesting. Actually, I'm originally from Bulgaria, and obviously a lot of A lot of actually the clients that I have worked with as well are selling in Europe. And so my question is, if, for example, a client has or like a seller has activity both in the US and Europe, would you say that it's a better strategy now to diversify your supply chain between sort of a couple of supply markets, let's say Turkey in Europe, and then maybe like China or India for other markets, or would you say like it's better to streamline your supply chain into just one market?
I think it depends on the product category and the specific products. So let's say if you are in, first of all, I think it is important for every seller to diversify. So
Mm.
especially if you're sourcing, from the in the US, if you're importing into the US, you must diversify. It's not an option anymore. It is like you have to mitigate your risks, because what if the trade war escalates further? I mean, earlier we were thinking that only Trump is sort of anti-China, but even Biden has, imposed so many tariffs on China recently, right? So even if Trump does not come into power, this trade war has sort of escalated to the next level with the most recent round of tariffs. So I think that's one reason why we should be prepared for what may come next. So you should definitely diversify. Where you
Mhm.
diversify and where you source from depends on your product categories. And some people that I know, they have launched new product categories because they want to diversify and they want to not depend on China, even if India or Vietnam does not make the product category that they are currently doing. They're actually launching a new product line entirely, out of Vietnam or India, just because they want to have
Mm.
diversified businesses. Yeah, so I would say look at the products that you're currently doing, see what are the different options available, because not all products can be sourced in India, Vietnam, Turkey. And then based on that, decide if you want to get pricing from specific countries, get pricing, get the landed cost, and if the economics works out, then shift some of your production to India or Vietnam or Turkey, depending on the product. But yeah, I totally agree with you, Joy. I think it's important to diversify at this time.
Mm.
And that kind of triggers another question in my mind. So it sounds like diversification is one of the big areas that potentially sellers can make, when sourcing. Are there any other big kind of red flags or pitfalls that you see people commonly fall into that you'd warn that you can talk about and warn people to stay away from?
Yes, definitely. There are so many. Where should I start? How much time do we have? Okay.
Sellers,
Yeah, I think I'll do a workshop on that, because I've been working with sellers for over 5 years now. And there's just so many things that we've seen overall. But overall, like the top three, okay, let's say the top three. The number one thing that I see sellers, the mistake that sellers make is not vetting the supplier properly from which they source, whether it's China, India, Vietnam, and more so India and Vietnam. Because, in China, there's a lot of information available about each supplier. There's Alibaba, you can get reviews, there's trade assurance. So there's a lot more ways to protect yourself. But India and Vietnam, there is Alibaba, but there's no trade assurance. There are no other, platforms like this. So when you're sourcing from these countries, you have to either, go through a sourcing agency, or you have to vet the supplier really, really well. And we've seen so many cases of people sourcing directly and not vetting the supplier properly, and then getting burned. And why do they get burned? So in India, there's a huge domestic market in India, right? There are 1.4 billion people. So there's a lot of products that are made for the domestic market that are not suitable for exports. And there are a lot of manufacturers in India that really focus on the domestic market, but they have no idea how to export. They have no export licenses. They don't know the quality requirements of export markets. But they're maybe not super ethical, and they will still accept orders from people when they place orders. And then once the order is ready, they're like, okay, here's your order, it's ready, come take it. And then the importer will say that, how do I ship it out of India? Well, that's not my problem. You ship it out however you want to. But then this manufacturer does not have an export license. They don't know how to manufacture the product and everything. So that's something that you have to be very careful of. Make sure that you are, one, working with a legitimate company, because unfortunately there are bad actors everywhere, whether India, China, Vietnam. There are people who say they are manufacturers, or they are companies, but actually they're not. So make sure it's a legitimate company. Second, make sure it's a manufacturer, or if it's a trading company, that they're upfront about it, that yes, we are a trading
Mhm.
company, we're not a manufacturer. There are advantages of working with both. And thirdly, that they should be export focused. So these are the three things that you just need to check. So that's one mistake, not vetting the supplier properly. Second mistake, I would say, is in terms of quality control, not setting all of the requirements and guidelines and penalties while placing the order. So you need to sort of make sure that first of all the supplier has all your product specifications in detail. Do not let the supplier assume anything. So make sure that you have given them guidelines of what your labels should be and what colors are acceptable, what sort of variations are acceptable, what sort of errors are not acceptable in the product. So all those guidelines need to be given very early on in the process. A lot of people just place the order and forget about it, and then 2 months later when the product is ready, they're like, oh, but why is there this problem in this product, or why is it shorter, or why is it longer? And then the supplier will say, but hey, you didn't tell me that. So make sure that there is nothing left to chance. There
Mhm.
should be, you should not let the supplier assume anything. Be as detailed as possible. And also, when you're sending them the purchase order or maybe signing a contract, then make sure you have penalties in place. Like, what happens if there are delays? What happens if there are quality issues? Who pays for the second inspection, for example, if there are quality issues in the first inspection? So all these things need to be detailed, and I think then it's clear for both parties what the consequences are. Also, you should mention to the supplier, if you are going to do a QC inspection, specify to them that you are going to do an inspection, and give them quality control criteria, that these are the things that the QC inspector is going to check once they come into the factory for doing inspections. So I would say that's the second mistake. And the third mistake I would say is, let me see, maybe in terms of quality control itself, I would say not doing an inspection, trusting the supplier too much after a few orders. In sourcing, there's this concept called quality fade. So what happens is, and this is very common, and this is a very old concept. It's not something new, and it's been going on in China as well for a long time. A lot of the bigger buyers really talk about this. And what this means is, when you start placing orders with one supplier on a consistent and regular basis, over time, the supplier sort of becomes a bit lax, and there tends to be quality fade in the product. So, but sometimes your e-commerce sellers think that, okay, I placed one order, it was fine, I don't need to do an inspection for the second or third order. So that is a mistake, because each order is different, because they are sourcing raw materials separately for each order. So you don't know what issues there can be, in one batch of the raw material versus another raw material, for example. Or maybe the supervisor on the assembly line changed from the first order, right? Maybe it's somebody new, they're not really aware of your specific guidelines, or they maybe miss some things. So there's so much that can change from one order to another. So always do at least one pre-shipment inspection. If your order is above, let's say, $20,000, then you should do at least two. In general, your QC and inspections should be about 3%, 3 to 4% of your order value.
This is so interesting and actually super helpful. I guess my
Yeah.
my question is like, there seems to be quite a lot of ways sellers could fall into like a trap. And so my
Yeah.
question is, would you say that sourcing from India, for example, is kind of for more seasoned sellers who already have quite a lot of experience already from, say, sourcing from China? Or would you say that, even like a complete beginner on Amazon can actually sort of dip their toes in sourcing from India?
I think it would be easier for somebody who is already seasoned and who understands
Mm.
how China works and how sourcing works in general. It would be easier, definitely. But even newbies can do it. I don't think it's a challenge as such. You just have to learn to do it the right way, or you can use the help of a sourcing agency like us. We can help you with, we can guide
Mhm.
you through the process, and then once you are comfortable doing it a couple of times, then you can maybe do it yourself. But I think it's for both. We do have a lot of clients who want to start in India, and they don't want to maybe start in China for various reasons. So yeah, it's for both.
So I'm just going to say we have quite a few people watching along with us live. So if you have any questions, put them in, and we will put them to Megla on the spot. But so Megla, we are an AI podcast. Our listeners kind of are very interested in AI. So how have you seen? It's definitely early days in AI, and kind of we're at the start of kind of an adoption curve, and sourcing is a complex thing. But how are you seeing AI starting to be implemented in sourcing?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And in fact, at this conference, there were some discussions about, using AI in sourcing specifically. So there is currently no specific tool as such for using, AI in sourcing, although that might change. I know a lot of companies are working on those types of tools. But in general, just at a very high level, we have started using, Chat GPT in our sourcing for basic things to improve efficiency and just to give some ideas to people, and maybe you can do the same in your sourcing. So first of all, things like finding suppliers. So although it doesn't always work, but you can always just put in a list of criteria that you have for specific products, the countries that you want, and maybe certain criteria for the for companies that you're searching for, like it should be a manufacturer, exporting to US, and certain criteria, and see what ChatGPT comes up with. So that's something that we have done. Of course, then that's like the first level, and then you have to go and vet the supplier and make sure that they are, real companies, legitimate companies. But at least you have one list to start with. So that's something that we've been doing. Then also things like writing product specifications. So that's something that's very tedious, and we have used ChatGPT to write product specifications for like various products. Let's say a wooden tray, for example. So what are the key features of a product that we can include in the spec sheet? Also, what are the quality control criteria? So that's something that we've used ChatGPT for as well. Like write a list of quality control criteria for a specific product. That's been quite interesting. And then of course you have to refine it, and it's not always comprehensive. And there are certain aspects that we know, only from experience you would know that these things can go wrong. But at least at a very high level, you have some basic ideas from ChatGPT. Then other things like creating a purchase order, for example, or how to reply to suppliers, or writing an email for an RFQ to send out to suppliers. So those sort of things we are already doing, and I think those are just sort of various ways to improve your efficiency, in terms of sourcing.
I'll jump in before Joe has a question, but I just have an idea
Yeah.
for you, Megla, which is
Yes.
you guys should build a custom GPT, because you're obviously a great brand in the sourcing world, and
Yeah.
you know this, and you know how all of the things you mentioned should work. So like that could be a cool idea to share with
Yeah.
customers. You just
Absolutely.
give them your custom GPT for the English sourcing trip, and say, here, this will help you do your product department.
Yeah.
So, but Joe, you had a question.
No, I just wanted to also add to this, actually, like on the sort of getting sourcing ideas, or like basically where to source. I definitely would recommend to check out Perplexity, because it has a direct plug into the internet, and then you can be very specific and follow up with like a lot of queries afterwards until you get to the refined search of suppliers that you want. So this is
Yeah.
one extra kind of
We're
build
sponsored
up.
by Perplexity on this podcast, actually.
No, we're
No, we're
not.
not.
It's just
I
such a
wish,
great
I
tool.
We should be.
Oh,
We
Max,
talk
you have
about
a
them a lot.
So my question is actually on the other side. So obviously you work with different manufacturers in India, in Vietnam. I'm curious, because this is something that we discuss with Amy Weiss a few episodes ago. How do you see, like, do you see any of the sort of on the back end, any of these tools or any of the AI, like basically, yeah, LLMs being already adapted into some of the processes from a manufacturing point of view? Or is this kind
So
of
I have
like
not,
still?
yeah, I have not seen any specific tools that are already adapted. But I know that there's some in the pipeline, and I don't want to talk about them over here because I don't think they're ready to openly
Yeah.
talk about the tool. But I can, share about it with you separately. But yeah, I'm sure there's lots in the pipeline. I wouldn't be surprised if Alibaba is, working on some sort of a
Mm,
tool that would help with
Well,
that we use AI, right?
I mean, I'm not a sourcing expert like you, but I was
Yeah,
spending I did spend 4 months in San Francisco recently, and there was a
yeah.
lot of people working on kind of humanoid robots. So you have Figure One, you have I forget their name, Sanctuary AI. There's like a bunch of people who are kind of like now LLMs has basically unlocked voice activated robots that can do basic tasks like moving boxes around or this kind of stuff. So my prediction here would be that we kind of are moving to a lot more roboticized manufacturers in the near future. Um,
Yeah.
but Megla, I'll follow up with kind of a question more on theme of the sourcing. So um, you mentioned that ChatGPT is one way of finding supplies, probably not the best way. Let's be honest. So how would you
Yeah.
kind of actually, how do you recommend people do it the proper way?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different ways. So first of all, there are these global marketplaces like Alibaba, Global Sources. So those are the two key marketplaces for India and also Vietnam. And both of them have offices in both countries. But of course, the focus of both of these platforms is on China. So 95% of the suppliers are from China. But if you do a product search and then use the country location filter, you will be able to find suppliers from different countries. So that's one thing that you can do. It's a good start. But just take note that a lot of the suppliers on Alibaba, for some reason, are traders, right? I mean, there are manufacturers, but more or less, I don't know, we find that there are more, traders. So just be cautious of that. And again, as I said, there's no harm in sourcing from a trading company, whether China or India, but they should just be upfront about it that yes, we're a trading company and we can source different products from different suppliers. We can give you low MOQs, better prices, even. But just be clear about that. And then for India and also Vietnam, just do a Google search. That way also you can find suppliers because Google is not blocked in India and Vietnam like it is in China. So a lot of the suppliers' websites are not indexed on Google in China, but that's not the case, in India. So you can just do a Google search. When you are doing a Google search, you will find this website called India Mart that will come up very often because it has a lot of content. But avoid India Mart or use it with caution. And the reason for that is it is very domestic focused. A lot of
mm,
the companies on there are Indian traders, distributors who are basically importing products from maybe China or elsewhere, or just manufacturers who are selling domestically. So it's primarily for domestic sales, but there are exporters there, but you've got to be very, very cautious when you are selecting suppliers from India Mart. And of course, India Sourcing Network, we don't have a supplier, like a public supplier directory anymore. We used to have that, but now we are more focused on the sourcing side of things. So, we do active sourcing. So that's another way to get started with sourcing in any of these countries. Use the services of a sourcing agent that understands the market really well and can help you easily pinpoint the right supplier for your product. Because I think that's the biggest challenge in sourcing, finding the right supplier for your product. I don't believe that there is any bad supplier, good supplier. It just has to be the right fit for you. For example, if you're just starting out, if you're a small buyer and you just want to place an order of like 100, 200 pieces, you don't want to go to a really big company because they're not going to entertain you at all, right? Or even if they do accept your order, you're going to be a very small fish for them and they're not going to prioritize your orders. So that's something to consider. Also, in terms of finding suppliers, you can also use trade promotion councils. So these are basically government organizations in India, and they are tasked with improving exports in their industries, in their segments. So, for example, there's an apparel export promotion council, handicrafts, toys, sports. There are like, I think, 20 or so of them. So you can go to their websites. Usually, they have a list of their members on their website that can be downloaded, or maybe a database that can be searched. So the good thing is that all of the suppliers on these websites are exporters, because these are export promotion councils. However, you still have to do your due diligence to check if they are manufacturers or traders, or if they make the product that you're looking for. So, but at least again, it's a good list to start with. So I think those
Mm.
are. Oh, okay. I should also mention trade shows. I think trade shows is a fantastic way to find suppliers in these two countries, because a lot of these manufacturers don't list on Alibaba, or they don't even update their websites on a regular basis. Like, I'll tell you this, my partners Margaret and Kevin, they've been sourcing from this one supplier for the last 6 years now, and this supplier is really good. He's doing containers every month, but they don't have a website. Can you believe it? Like, they don't even have a website. And we've told him so many times, like, why don't you have a website, Ayush? Come on, you should at least, he's like, we don't need it. We have enough orders. If we have a website, we won't be able to manage all of the other orders. Most of our customers we get through trade shows or word of mouth, so we don't need a website. So it's impossible to find some of these good suppliers unless you go visit a trade show. So in for India, the trade show that you should visit is called Delhi Fair. It's held twice a year, February and October. And when we do India sourcing trip, we actually bring people to this trade show. It's a fantastic trade show to visit, because you get to meet 4,500 suppliers over there, and you see hundreds and thousands of products at a time, and all of them are export focused. And most of them are manufacturers, like 90% are manufacturers, and there are only a few like traders or companies that sort of collect products from other manufacturers. So yeah, trade shows is another great way to find suppliers.
Awesome. And actually, I'm really interested because, we talked a few episodes ago about the cultural differences, for example, in Japan and China. What would you say are the cultural differences when it comes to dealing with manufacturers in India, and how are they different than, for example, suppliers in China?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joe. So I think India and China are similar in many ways. So first of all, like in China, relationships are really important, right? To build relation. There's a word called guanxi, which basically means a business relationship. So in India, that's really important too, but times 10. So in India, yeah, a lot of the work that you get done, and how it gets done, and how you are treated by your business partners really depends on what kind of relationship you have with them. And it's just so important in India to build a relationship with either your sourcing agent or with your manufacturer, like whoever you are dealing with directly. And like when we source from manufacturers, and we have to develop a good relationship with them as well. So if there are certain manufacturers I talk to on a regular basis, I won't just pick up the phone and call them and say that, hey, how's my order going, what's happening, this, that. I will just start in a friendly way, and I'll sort of say that, what's going on, how are your kids, what's going on over there, oh, did you hear about this, what's happening in the elections, and just sort of some chit chat, and build sort of a rapport and a friendly kind of rapport. I just call this supplier very often. We were working on a project, and I used to call him on a regular basis, and then he used to say, "Oh, you didn't call me today. I felt that there's something missing in my day. You didn't call." It was just sort of a joke, but you've got to build that sort of a rapport with the supplier or whoever you're working with, because it's not all about business. I think in China, even though the relationship is important, it's still very transactional. It's still like, okay, give me my money and take your order. In India, once you build that relationship, they will, of course, they care about money. I'm not saying they don't care about money, but they will not be as strict. They will not say that, okay, we will not start making the order until and unless we have your payment. So just to give you another example of my partners, Margaret and Kevin, this supplier that they've been sourcing from, now when they place an order after 5 years, they don't even have to pay a deposit. They just call him or send him a text or WhatsApp and say that, hey, we want 2,000 pieces of this, 100, 1,000 pieces of this, and prepare the order. And then 2 months later or whenever the order is ready, they will get the invoice and that, okay, this your order is done and it's on the boat and here's your invoice. So that level of trust, once that develops, you'll find that it's so much easier to work with suppliers. They will give you better prices, they will treat you better, they will give you preferential treatment in terms of your order status, your the priority of your orders. So yeah, building relationships is really important. And one of the best ways to build relationship is to go meet them in person. Like Indian suppliers love it when you go there, either at a trade show or if you go meet them in their factory. It just changes the game entirely. And that's why, I started India sourcing trip, because I wanted to bring people to India, because India can be intimidating for people to go on their own. Seriously. I mean, there's like, it's not like, some countries in Europe or whatever, they're easier to navigate, but India can be overwhelming. There are so many people. It's a developing country. There's poverty. So that's why it's just more fun to travel in a group. Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned in the previous question, how you help with the India sourcing network find different suppliers, because it's not it's not always easy. You just mentioned kind of the trip you do as well. So I know you also have a community, Megla. So do you want to talk a bit more about how you help sellers in this space? And I don't know if you want to touch on any additional things beyond those two.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two ways that we help sellers source products. First is, sourcing agency. So basically, we manage the entire process from start to end.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes, finding the supplier, negotiating prices, developing prototypes, sampling, packaging, placing orders, facilitating payments, everything, including facilitating shipping as well. And of course, we manage quality control. That's a very key part. And I should really highlight that, because that's where a lot of sellers struggle. So we manage quality control. So that's the sourcing agency side. We do that both in India and Vietnam, and also now very soon Turkey. The second thing that we do is India sourcing trip and Vietnam sourcing trip. So we do 2 trips to these 2 countries. Vietnam is once a year, and India sourcing trip is currently it's twice a year, but from next year it will also be once a year. So Vietnam is in April, and then India sourcing trip is every October. And these are basically very immersive experiences where you can get to learn all about how to source from that country. So we do informational sessions, conferences, mastermind sessions, networking sessions. We have our own sourcing experts, talk to you about various aspects like cultural sensitivities and managing quality and things like that. So there's a lot of learning about how to source in these countries. Then there's actual sourcing. So we go visit a trade show in both countries. There are different trade shows. In Vietnam, there's a Global Sources trade show. It's a much smaller trade show with about 500 companies. So we spend one day at the Vietnam trade show. And then in India, because it's a bigger trade show, we spend 3 days there. And we provide a lot of support at the trade show as well. So you'll have our sourcing experts guide you and take you around or walk around with you. We also invite e-commerce coaches to our sourcing trips, so that they can help you with product selection and give you ideas of how to differentiate your products as well, because that's something that I think people sometimes struggle with, identifying the right product and then deciding how to make it different so it stands out. So for our next India trip, we will most likely have Gary Huang come over. Don't you love Gary, Max?
We're actually clashing with Gary as we record this, because he's also got his like
7-figure seller summit.
Exactly, but it's all all recorded and we're live, so that's the difference with Gary. No, I'm joking. He's great. He's been on our podcast.
Yeah, he's amazing, and he actually traveled with me. He actually was on India sourcing trip in 2019, like the very first trip that I did. He came on that trip, and he's written about it. So yeah, he's coming back most probably as a coach. And then for our Vietnam trip, we've got Ben Leonard from the UK. Yeah, I'm sure you know him. He's also amazing. So he's a coach on the upcoming Vietnam trip as well. So that's the second aspect. You can actually source products. We also visit many factories in Vietnam. In fact, we visit quite a few factories in 3 different cities. And in India, the focus is more on the trade show because it's such a big trade show. And then the factory visits are sort of optional or add ons. And then for both trips, also, there are some cultural experiences. So for India, for example, we visit Taj Mahal, which is one of the seven wonders of the world. We also do a Bollywood night where we can dress up in saris and do some Bollywood dancing and singing. And then in Vietnam, we do a one night on a boat in Halong Bay, which is a very picturesque and beautiful lake over there. And then we do other experiences as well. And of course, the food, like both Indian and Vietnamese food is amazing. So we, select the menu and the restaurants very carefully to make sure that people can have a selection and a wide variety of the foods that are available in both countries. So yeah, I mean, that's the trip basically. In a nutshell, it's learning, sourcing, and cultural experiences. That's what these trips are all about. And the networking in these trips are amazing. I mean, as you can imagine, Max, you travel to a lot of conferences, right? When you meet people in person and you talk to them, you get so many ideas, and you're learning from each other. So that networking is just invaluable. And when you spend 8 to 10 days with somebody, the bond that you develop over that period is just for life, literally. I mean, the trip that we did in 2019, we still have the WhatsApp group, and somebody or the other will every once in a while post a message there, and people meet up in different cities. So it's just amazing. I mean, the networking and the bond that you will build with other sellers, it's priceless.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I have to say, like, I'm very curious about this, and like the combination of all these things sounds amazing. I actually am very curious. How did you start your journey into this whole sourcing industry, and like how did you basically start working with Amazon sellers?
Yeah. So I've been in sourcing for over 20 years. I worked for a company called Global Sources, which I just mentioned, the B2B platform. So I worked with them in India, then the Philippines, in China for 10 years, and then in Singapore for around 7 years or so. So when I was with them, I started organizing, like I had different roles throughout the years. But in 2015 or so, one of the tasks that I was assigned was to develop a conference for e-commerce and Amazon sellers in Hong Kong. Because at that time, a lot of e-commerce Amazon sellers had started to source private label products from Asia, and most of them were using Alibaba. So Global Sources, which is a competitor of Alibaba, wanted to attract some of these sellers to their trade shows and to their platform. So they wanted to, one of the ways of doing this was to organize a conference. And so I was made in charge of the conference. And that's how I started, reaching out to all of these e-commerce experts around 2015. And we did our first conference in 2016, April. And interestingly, Greg Mercer was a speaker at that conference. And Jungle Scout was just starting out at that time, and people had no idea of how, what potential it has. And at that time, I still remember he was like, it was in the early stages, and he was talking about this, and you'll be able to tell which keywords people search for, and you'll be able to, and everybody was like amazed, like, wow, oh my God, this is groundbreaking. So I have literally seen the whole e-commerce industry evolve from that stage, 2016. And then I decided to start my own venture in 2019 because at that time the China and US trade war had started. And actually it was at a networking event that somebody suggested to me that, hey, why don't you help people source from India because of this trade war that's starting? And that thought just sort of stuck with me. And, in 2019, there was sort of an opportunity to either move out of Singapore or maybe, try something different. So I thought, okay, let me try doing this sourcing trip to India and see how it goes and if it does fly. So we did the sourcing trip, the first one in 2019, and then of course COVID happened in 2020. So that was just so bad timing. And so that's why we started doing sourcing then, like virtual sourcing. And we started helping people, source virtually. And then one thing led to another, people started asking about Vietnam because that was an upcoming production center. So we started Vietnam. And then, now Turkey has come up. We've started doing Turkey as well. So, yeah.
Amazing. We will link the indiasourcingtrip.com in the show notes below. But if people want to reach out to you, Megla, what's the best way to kind of get in contact?
Well, social media, they can reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn. That's the best way. I think we are streaming this on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah.
So send me a request, send me a message on
There is a
LinkedIn.
bit
That's
of
the
a
easiest
LinkedIn
way.
influencer, so you're going to get a lot of people maybe following up from her network there.
Yeah, I
Great.
check all my messages on LinkedIn. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for. And anything else do you want to add to this? I guess we're at 45 minutes is a good time to wrap up. But is there any closing thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I think I just want to say that sometimes in sourcing, people get very comfortable sourcing in one location, in one place, especially if you're sourcing in China. Things are sort of easy, and people are apprehensive to go outside of China. But there's a whole different world out there. Go explore the world. China is not everything when it comes to sourcing. There are tremendous amounts of like unique products that are out there, and if you are adventurous enough and brave enough to venture out into these different worlds, unknown worlds, you will be rewarded, because not a lot of people are doing that currently, right? So you will be one of the first to get access to these very unique products. And of course, you must diversify in order to mitigate risks, especially if you are sourcing entirely from China.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was such an interesting episode, and I learned so much. And also I feel really chuffed about those sourcing tricks. I really want to go to one.
You probably don't know.
Yeah,
unless
October.
maybe you listened, but Joe has been asking everyone about sourcing for basically all of our early episodes. So it's good now we've answered all the questions. I think it's comprehensive. Thank you, Megla.
Most welcome. Yeah, Joe, the next trip is in October. You still have time to prepare. So let's talk about that.
Definitely.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And we'll see you hopefully in October in India and Vietnam.
Absolutely. That'd be amazing. All right. Thank you